What's up guys, welcome to Talking Poodoo, a Star Wars show where today I'm doing a sort of review slash analysis of Star Wars Episode 9, Duel of the Fates. Now if you don't know what that is, let's go on a journey now. Originally, this new trilogy of Star Wars films was going to have J.J. Abrams launching it, Rian Johnson doing the middle one, and then Colin Trevorrow doing the final one. And then some things happened after the release of The Last Jedi. I'm not going to go into all of the specifics of that, but basically Colin Trevorrow was fired or removed from that film. Then J.J. Abrams came in, rewrote the script with Chris Terrio, and then that became The Rise of Skywalker. So this is the Duel of the Fates is the original script written by Colin Trevorrow and Derek Connolly. I say the original, it might be an early draft. It could be like the second or third draft or whatever it is. By the way, they wrote a script for what would have been Episode 9, Duel of the Fates, and it leaked online, along with a bunch of concept art, which hopefully, if my editing skills are up to the task, you are seeing throughout this show. So, I've read the script. It's very easy to find online. I encourage you to read it as well. It's a very interesting, cool, what-if alternate reality scenario of what could have been Episode 9. So, a few notes before I get into there. This is very likely an early draft of it. There are some spelling errors, there are some inaccuracies in there as well, with certain names popping up when they shouldn't be, and yeah, just a couple of little errors, so clearly it was a working draft. It was also written prior to Carrie Fisher's death. And that's pretty obvious because Leia has a much bigger role in this than what she did have in The Rise of Skywalker. I would say less significant, we'll get into that later, but a bigger role. So no matter what, whether Colin Trevorrow stayed on this film, they would have had to rewrite this script to accommodate that at the very least. And it's worth noting that Colin Trevorrow and Derek Connolly have still been credited in The Rise of Skywalker as story written by. There are certain elements from this script, certain ideas and concepts which have been pulled and put into The Rise of Skywalker, so I totally understand why that is. But it should be said that the main crux of the narrative, the main plot elements are different. So let's get into it. What are my initial thoughts on Duel of the Fates? Well, it's very interesting, it's very cool, it's very fun and enjoyable to read. Now it's hard to judge this as what would it have been as a film, because it's not a film, it's a script. So yeah, you've kind of got to use your imagination a bit. But yeah, it's a very interesting, cool what-if scenario, as in like an alternate reality, what could have been. That being said, I do have quite a few issues with it. Mainly the depiction of certain characters and what certain characters are doing, certain ideas and concepts as well. So there are a lot of characters in this movie that don't seem to be doing all that much significant. And I'll get into the specifics of that later on. There are also some questionable character decisions, characters going on certain journeys which don't make huge amount of sense, which are like, the veering into territory I don't really like about Star Wars and stuff like that. Again, all the specifics will be coming up soon. One thing I'm very confident in saying is that this would have been a very, very controversial Star Wars movie. More so than The Rise of Skywalker, I think, because this is a bold, very dark film script. Star Wars, when you think dark Star Wars, you're probably thinking Empire Strikes Back, where that is a very moody thing where essentially the bad guys win at the end of that film. Then you've also got Revenge of the Sith, which is of course the downfall of the Jedi. In terms of the new sequel trilogy, Last Jedi is fairly dark. This would have took it all up to a next level thing where it's some really horrific, like horror moments are happening here. You've got dark visions, you've got executions and beheadings and suicides and slave camps, and yeah, it's really some dark stuff in there. And I kind of understand why Disney and Lucasfilm might have been like, ooh, maybe not do this, maybe we need to go a different approach here. Because at the end of the day, Star Wars is meant for kids. Adults like it, I like it, but it's a kids movie franchise. And I think some of the stuff in this, particularly some of the more like the suicide stuff and all that lot, would have been maybe too much. It's also worth pointing out that this script does pull a lot of elements from TV shows like Star Wars The Clone Wars. There are a lot of links and connections to that, which is really cool and interesting. And things from Rebels come in there as well. Ultimately, I do think this is worth a read. I do think it's very interesting. It is very controversial. Not everyone's going to like it, but I think if you're a Star Wars fan, it's a must grab, must get. And like I said, you can just type it in on the internet, on Google or whatever. You're bound to find a copy of the script. It's very easily accessible. Of course, the big question out of this is, would it have been better than The Rise of Skywalker? Because that film gets a mixed reception. Some people like it, some people absolutely hate it. I get it. Personally, I like it. I thought it was very fun and enjoyable. It's not as good as it should have been, but whatever. You can see my review for all my comments on that. I think this would have been worse than The Rise of Skywalker. Mainly because there are certain elements which I didn't find all that satisfying. There were certain character moments and decisions which I was left scratching my head at, left thinking I did not really want or imagine these characters going in that direction. There was a lot of things that I just felt were unfulfilled, a lot of promises and things set up that weren't really explained or planned ahead. And you could argue some of that stuff for The Rise of Skywalker as well, but I think in this particular draft of the script, maybe again, it probably would have been reworked a bit, probably would have had a bit more hammering home, let's say, but a lot of it just wasn't connecting in certain regards. So now I'm going into the full analysis and review of this. What that means, I thought about doing multiple approaches to this, so instead I'm sticking to a character by character basis. I'm going to go from one character to the other because it's the best way to sum up everything that's happening in this script and to give my full opinions on it. So let's start things off with the main character, Rey. So in many ways in this sequel trilogy, Rey has been the new Luke Skywalker. Although you can't really become a new Luke Skywalker, there's only one. And this really hammers that home. So much so in that everything from her appearance to what she's doing, her character arc in this movie is very, very similar to The Return of the Jedi and what Luke does in that movie. So much so that if you remember Return of the Jedi, we first see Luke, he's now fully trained, he's a full-fledged Jedi, and he's got these black outfit, this cool black outfit and a new lightsaber. Well, guess what? That's the exact same thing that happens in this with Rey. Her first introduction, she's now wearing a black outfit, which I don't think she would have suited, but she's wearing a black outfit nonetheless. She's a fully trained Jedi, she's got new force powers and abilities. The script actually highlights that, hey, she's now advanced in the force. She's also got a cool new lightsaber, which is made from the destroyed remnants of Anakin's lightsaber and her staff from when she was on Jakku. And it's a double-bladed one as well, so that's really cool and interesting to have the hero character with a double-bladed lightsaber. Of course, we've seen some of that stuff in the Clone Wars and so on. But the main focus of her story, what's motivating her, is Kylo Ren. Her whole story is about trying to find Kylo Ren, trying to stop Kylo Ren, and perhaps even save him. But there is a B-plot surrounding her and another character, a romance story with Poe Dameron. Yeah, Poe Dameron, where the hell has this came from? It feels really forced, no pun intended. They only met at the end of The Last Jedi. They literally had one exchange of dialogue and that's it. So where's this romance idea came from? I mean, Poe had more chemistry and more connection with Finn, and a lot of people were really vying for Poe and Finn to be in a relationship, and yet this script would have had it with Poe and Rey. It doesn't make sense, it feels like this came out of nowhere, and yeah, I don't buy it at all in this film. And it's one of them romances as well where there's not so much a chemistry between them, it's more of like, oh, he's got these odds moments of coincidences where they like finish each other's sentences, where they are so in sync with one another, they work well together, and it's stuff like that. It's really awkward, really cheesy kind of stuff. And much of this B storyline surrounding Poe and Rey is all about them feeling awkward about it and trying to realise that, hey, we're in love. And Rey in particular seems to struggle with the idea of it because it seems like she's never had someone like that in her life. And then later on, the Knights of Ren, who are way cooler in this than what they were in The Rise of Skywalker, are hunting down Rey in particular. And in a similar vein to what happened in Return of the Jedi, when Luke realizes that his link with Vader is putting everyone else at risk, something like happens here in that Rey acknowledges that her link with what's going on with Kylo and the Knights of Ren, who are hunting them down, is putting everyone she knows at risk. So again, another Return of the Jedi nod there. And this culminates in a really cool action scene about halfway through the script or the film or whatever, in which it's Rey, Chewie and Poe on a planet called Bonadan, I think it is. And it's a really interesting planet made up of lots of platforms and stuff. Hopefully the concept art is on the screen now to let you know that, what it looks like. And there's a really cool sequence, a lot like, say, the end sequence in Mission Impossible Ghost Protocol or something in like Fast and Furious, where the platforms are moving up and down. Rey takes on the Knights of Ren. It's really cool. She does a good job of it. She comes out of it looking like a total badass, basically. And she really taps into the anger and the power that she's got with the Force in this scene, which is again teasing her dark side proclivities. Proclivities, is that the right word? I'm gonna stick with it even if it's wrong. But this is one of the running things throughout this sequel trilogy is, who is Rey? What's her real allegiance? She does have dark side tendencies, and this film really teases that and probes into that, and eventually it becomes a thing of she has to embrace the dark side. She has to bring the dark and the light together to be something different and new. Because it's not so much about ignoring the dark side, it's not so much about ignoring the bad, it's more about acknowledging it and embracing it and controlling it. Which I kind of like the idea of. That's a really interesting theme, I think. And then a lot of the significant stuff with Rey doesn't happen until like the final act of the film, when she does find Kylo Ren on Mortis. We'll get into that in a bit. But there they of course have a fight, and it abruptly gets cut in half when Kylo Ren blinds Rey. Yeah, a lightsaber strike to the face, and it seems like it's going to be like almost like a Tyrion Lannister on Game of Thrones kind of thing, except more around the eyes. She gets blinded like Kaiden or whatever in Star Wars Rebels. And again, this is a dark moment for a Star Wars film. The main hero gets like a horrific injury. Now, I don't think it's meant to be like gory or anything like that. It's more like just a mark or a scar across her face, rather than like her eyes are popping out and everything like that. It's nothing like that. But it is pretty grim. And this is towards the end of the film, so it doesn't last a huge amount of time. But we then find out more about her backstory and more about her parentage, because of course we had to find out more. Last Jedi, remember, Kylo says he knew about her parents and that they were no one. Of course there was a whole thing of, did he actually know? Was he lying to her? How accurate were his claims? Well, it turns out in this version of the script, he knew very well who they were, because he was the one that was sent to kill them. And he was sent there under orders from Snoke. Why? Because Snoke apparently knew that Rey would be a threat, and the parents were a threat as well or something, so he wanted Kylo to kill them. Why Rey survived or whatever, I don't know. I think the parents basically ditched her for safety, ran away, then Kylo found them and killed them. That makes a bit more sense. So of course this fuels Rey's anger a bit more. Rey now has a much more personal vendetta against Kylo. And somewhere in here, I'm kind of forgetting, but somewhere she goes away from real life and is taken to a place called the astral plane. The best way I can describe this is if you've seen the final Harry Potter movie. When Harry Potter, spoilers, dies, he goes to this weird like white environment where he meets Dumbledore and has a big heart-to-heart chat. Well, here in this astral plane, it's Rey meeting Luke, Obi-Wan and Yoda. And it's great that these characters are here. I'd love to know how they were going to do Obi-Wan. Was it going to be Ewan McGregor's Obi-Wan? Were they going to do CGI or age him up or makeup or whatever? I don't know. We'll never know, I suppose. But ultimately, here, this is a weird, awkward scene in which these Jedi are trying to tell Rey, embrace the dark side, bring the light and the dark together, control it. This is where she basically learns her lesson, essentially. But why is it so awkward? It's mainly because Rey has never met, or she doesn't know, Obi-Wan and Yoda. Obviously she knows Luke, but there's no like introduction to these characters. Luke doesn't say, oh, these were my masters, this is little Yoda, this is Obi-Wan. No. And Rey never asks who these people are, she just like accepts it. That, oh, there they are, yeah. And it's really weird, really awkward, because it's mainly Obi-Wan and Yoda who are talking to her at this point, not so much Luke. Although Luke does chime in. So yeah, why have these characters be of some sort of significant importance to Rey when she's never met them, she doesn't know them? It's weird. And this whole idea of the astral plane in Star Wars is also a little off. It feels a bit more fantastical than what Star Wars usually goes in. But yeah, Star Wars has went in some weird places before, so I'm sure I could buy it if I actually saw it in visualized form. So at the end of that, she has a decision to make. Either continue in real life with all that, the enjoyment that life entails and all of the downfalls that life entails as well, or she can join them in basically the afterlife kind of thing. And this is after her fight with Kylo, which I'm going to go into specifics of later on. So this choice, she comes to a decision. She decides to live, which is great. And her first thing is that she then reunites with her friends and all the other heroes, Finn and Rose in particular, who have basically rescued and gathered all the Force sensitive kids, particularly the guy with the kid with the broom at the end of The Last Jedi, and they're there waiting for Rey to show up to start up a new Jedi Order, essentially. And that's how the film ends, that's how Rey's story ends. She's very much going off to become the new Luke Skywalker. So overall, her arc, I think, is a little generic, to be honest. There are some cool moments, some cool themes in there, some good action moments, but ultimately it's her coming to terms with her anger, her parentage, her past, and then acknowledging what she wants to do in the future. And it's very typical storytelling, and I don't think they've done anything remarkable or unique or too interesting with this to really set her apart. In many ways, she is just a new Luke Skywalker in this film, and that's disappointing. But ultimately, she does get a happy ending, she does get the answers she wants. We do find out her surname as well, although at this point it doesn't really mean much because it turns out her parents weren't anything of note, because Kylo was kind of sort of telling the truth. And I think her surname was like Solando or something like that, which is very close to Solo for some reason. But yeah, that's another issue altogether. But her whole story arc does feel generic, it does feel fairly standard and unoriginal at times, and it has its moments, I suppose. And most significantly, I think it lacks certain emotion. Of course, this is a script. Maybe it would have been better with a John Williams theme booming behind her or in some sort of visual form. Who knows? But that's Rey. Now talking about the Knights of Ren. The Knights of Ren are bunched into one. Firstly, I'll say the Knights of Ren are presented in a much better way in this script than what they were in The Rise of Skywalker. In The Rise of Skywalker, they were essentially just nasty looking henchmen who were on the hunt for the good guys. In this one, they're kind of doing the same thing, but they're treated much more as like villainous characters who are not so much looked down upon by the First Order, but feared by the First Order. And this is really hammered home in the first scene they're introduced in, which is like 10 minutes into the script, in which they arrive on the First Order ship to see what's going on. The First Order knows that they've done bad and that they've failed their mission, what's happening at this point. And the leader of the Knights of Ren pulls out the Darksaber from the Clone Wars and Rebels and now the Mandalorian. So of course, pulling in from them, they would have been like, oh, how did he get that lightsaber? What's the history there? Because we know who had it last. Obviously, this has all been retconned now because we know that someone else has it. But anyway, the Knights of Ren pull out the lightsaber, the Darksaber, and they execute the leader right there in front of everyone on the ship. Really cool, really intimidating, really ominous, and gives them a really good presence and establishes them as a good, significant threat. Something the Rise of Skywalker never really did. And I've talked about how they then battle Rey, Poe, and Chewie. They are on board their ship, the Knife 9, which is a weird name, I think. But there is a cool chase sequence there on Bonadan, resulting in a battle scene between them and Rey. It's all really cool, interesting stuff. And that's all they really do in the film. Now we're going to talk Kylo Ren. Kylo Ren, I think, is probably the most disappointing element of this script. Of course, he's the main villain. And he has his own storyline, his own quest going on, so much so that he spends a lot of this film on his own on this quest. And the problem is, we know where he's going to Mortis from the Clone Wars, but we don't know why. And all we know is that he's looking for some artifact. We assume it's the dagger of Mortis, but we don't know. And we never find out, because spoilers, The end of the film, he gets to Mortis, he gets to where the artifact should be, and it's not there. So, yeah. It all feels a little pointless at the end, to be honest, with that. But Mortis is said to be in the unknown regions. This is a really cool, interesting feature because the expanded universe was hinting that something was going on in the unknown regions after the events of Return of the Jedi. So it's cool that they would actually explain that, and this is something that happens in The Rise of Skywalker as well. Although the whole Mortis thing is removed and then it's changed with something else. But the real disappointing thing is his motivation. What he's actually seeking. Yes, he's after a physical artifact, but what does that mean? What does it represent? It turns out he's after power. When did Kylo Ren become such a power-mad, power-hungry individual? Because he seemed to be wanting something more than that in The Last Jedi and in The Force Awakens. Like in Force Awakens, he was just doing his master's bidding. In Last Jedi, when he kills Snoke, it turns out, yes, he does want power, he does want to control the galaxy, but for a reason. He wanted to get peace and so on, or at least he said that. So, when did he become so corrupt? When did he become so one-note and so singularly focused? It feels a bit out of character, I think, and it really reduces him from being a nuanced, well-developed character to just being a one-note villain. And his quest all starts when he goes to Moraband, finds Palpatine's holocron, opens it up, and then he gets a message from Palpatine. So it's cool that Palpatine would have been in this, albeit in a really small, less important and significant role. And this is what sets him on a quest to go to Mortis. Of course, by doing this, this holocron has a booby trap. And this booby trap basically shoots like electric up to his body and so on. And it's really graphic and it seems like it's gonna be really damaging to Kylo, so much so that it would like impact his veins and the colour of his skin and everything, and then he has to permanently get a helmet to put onto his head. First he has like a slab of metal grafted to his face, then he gets a helmet which is supposed to be like much more sharp version of the Vader and helmet that he wore in Force Awakens, and he gets that new helmet put on to make him much more intimidating and scary and ominous. And they even go out and point out that in the script it says that he's got a breathing sound like Vader, but it's much deeper, much more guttural. So yeah, again linking him to Vader, making him much more monster than man at this point. But throughout this film, Luke Skywalker is popping in to visit Kylo Ren like he said he would in The Last Jedi, and he's constantly trying to steer him in the right direction, give him some advice and bring him back to the good side like Rey suggested was possible. And that's really good. It gives Luke much more to do than what he had in The Rise of Skywalker, and it also sticks to what Luke said he was going to do at the end of The Last Jedi, which The Rise of Skywalker never did. On his quest, he goes to this new planet where he meets Palpatine's master's master. So not Darth Plagueis, the person who trained Darth Plagueis. And the big question here is, Palpatine killed Darth Plagueis, why didn't he kill this master? Because Palpatine clearly knew about him because he sent Kylo here. So yeah, it's odd. Why is this guy allowed to live and why is Darth Plagueis dead? And yeah, it's really weird. And on this planet, Kylo goes to his cave where he has a Force vision, much like Luke did in Return of the Jedi, and yeah, he sees Darth Vader. And they have a really cool, intense action scene, but brief action scene, and basically Vader owns him and puts him in his place. And then it ends. Kylo realizes, oh, he's not Darth Vader, he's not nowhere near as powerful or as good as Darth Vader, and that adds fuel to his quest to get more power. And somewhere along these lines, I feel like Luke or Leia or Han or someone should have told Kylo, hey, Darth Vader, he used to be a Jedi, he used to be a good guy, and then right towards the end, he became good again. Why has no one actually told him this? Why has no one actually said what the downfall of Vader was or told him about his grandfather? Because he seems to have a very specific idea and vision about who he was. But this master's master, I think his name's Tovalum, I can't remember, I could be getting that wrong. But he trains Kylo in a new Force ability to drain life force. This is something that was in The Rise of Skywalker. Rey does it to cure this big snake creature, and Kylo himself does it later on to bring Rey back from the dead. And there it's treated in a much more grounded and more natural way. This the depiction here though, it actually looks like he's actually sucking the life out of creatures, and it feels way more fantastical than what Star Wars usually goes. And the question is here, this is Palpatine's master's master, so how come Palpatine never knew this trick? Like, surely if Palpatine knew this trick, he wouldn't need to have Darth Vader as apprentice. The Sith wouldn't need to keep carrying on, because Palpatine could just keep draining the life force from other beings to keep himself alive. So yeah, what's the history there? How come Palpatine doesn't know this power? How come Palpatine got so old and weak and decrepit towards the end? And, well, weak isn't the right word, but you get what I mean. This whole life force thing, and particularly the draining of life force, I think opens up a bunch of problems, some of which are veering into the more silly side of Star Wars, which I'm not that keen on, and some of which just open up story and plot problems which need further explaining. But anyway, Kylo drains the life force of a being on this planet and of Torvalum, which then makes him like really cartoonishly powerful with the force, so much so that he can do a force power on this planet which impacts something on Coruscant. And yeah, here it just gets really silly for Kylo's story, where he is just power mad, so much so he's focused solely on being more powerful, being stronger and better than what he is. Somewhere along the lines, Kylo has another vision or a dream sequence. This one shows us him meeting Han Solo. So Harrison Ford probably would have had to come in here. Maybe it would have been Alden Ehrenreich, but I doubt it. But Harrison Ford, Han Solo, and this is right the moment when Kylo, at this point Ben, is basically abandoning his parents to go and follow Snoke. Leia's not there for some reason, and basically this whole conversation, it mimics what happened in The Force Awakens with Kylo killing Han Solo. The issue here is that it's clearly meant to be like a final reach out to his son. It's meant to be Han saying, hey, look, we're always going to be here, come with us. It's supposed to be really emotional and so on. That his son basically abandoning him to be a bad guy. Other than that, this scene feels a little pointless and unnecessary. Yeah, it's nice to know what happened, but it doesn't add a huge deal, because we kind of predicted this happened at some point anyway. And I mentioned earlier how Kylo is the one that killed Rey's parents on the orders from Snoke. So this brings up more issues in that we know that Rey was abandoned as a kid. She couldn't have been more than, I don't know, 5 or 6 or something like that. So Kylo was the one that went and killed them. Fine. But then how old's Kylo? Because I always assumed he was supposed to be about 30 years old at the time of The Force Awakens. Rey is of course meant to be like 19 or 18. So this must have happened like 10 to 15 years earlier. In which case Kylo would have been like 15 to 20 years old, which is really young to be doing that. In which case, we saw in The Last Jedi, Ben, as he was called then, in flashbacks, didn't look that old. He was still played by Adam Driver. So yeah, this whole thing about this revelation does throw in some timeline issues, but it's not unheard of to have these issues in Star Wars. So maybe it's not a huge deal. Maybe I'm thinking more about it than I should. But it's also worth pointing out that while it is revealed that Snoke ordered Kylo to do all this, there's no explanation of who Snoke is, where Snoke came from. Snoke's just gone. So yeah, that would have been disappointing, because a lot of the big things about this sequel trilogy is who was Snoke, where did he come from. They do answer that in The Rise of Skywalker, and with one line of dialogue, and that personally I'm satisfied with that, but I totally understand if others aren't. The Rise of Skywalker does a better job of explaining who Snoke is than what this film would have done, in that The Rise of Skywalker actually gave us an answer. Then the final thing I'm going to talk about with Kylo is his death scene. So Kylo dies at the end of this movie, and it's very sudden, very abrupt, very vague, really disappointing. There's a moment in this death scene when he's fighting Rey, which is very similar to what happened in The Rise of Skywalker, in that Leia reaches out to him, which provides a sort of distraction of sorts. And in The Rise of Skywalker, Rey capitalizes on this distraction and stabs him with a lightsaber. That doesn't happen in this. Instead, Leia reaches out to Kylo, does get his attention, he stops fighting Rey, and all of a sudden he becomes a good guy again. It's like, oh, this one moment of connection, which is pretty much exactly what happened in The Rise of Skywalker, just so you have an idea. This one moment was enough to bring him to the good side. Right. It feels very sudden, very forced. And then his actual death, he helps Ray up in that one moment, and all of a sudden the life force is sucked out of him and put into Ray. And he dies. Yeah. So did he sacrifice himself? Was it a voluntary death? What exactly changed his allegiance? Was it just that, oh, my mom's a good guy? Did he just remember that? I don't know. It was weird. There's very little explanation as to why or how this is all happening. And this sudden change from him being a bad guy to being a good guy to being dead all happens in the space of one sentence. It's really quick and really disappointing. So now I'm talking about Finn and Rose. I'm doing these together because their storylines are so intertwined and so connected that it just makes sense to do them together. Firstly, I say Rose has a much bigger and more important and much better role in this version of the film than what she did in The Rise of Skywalker. So if you like Rose, you'll love this. But the main crux of their story is sending them to Coruscant, which is where the main battles of this film is happening. There, they have a very important mission to establish this communication array underneath the Jedi Temple. But this is all very far-fetched, very fantastical, and why hasn't this been explained before? Since when did the Jedi Temple have this technology hidden beneath it? Who knows? But they're doing this in order to send a message from Leia across the entirety of the galaxy to rally for support. So, yeah. That I'm kind of fine with. It's just the actual idea of it being beneath the temple which I'm a little iffy about. And Coruscant, by the way, in this one it's much more dirty and grungy, almost like an Escape from New York kind of feel to it, where it is run down, it's run by gangs, there's buildings are destroyed and decrepit and so on. It's very much like a Blade Runner, a darker version of Coruscant as opposed to what is depicted like in the prequels, which is really cool. But earlier moments in this script have these two characters sharing some good, awkward comedic moments and beats. They're on friendly terms. In fact, it's hinted that they are now in a full-fledged relationship after they kissed at the end of The Last Jedi. Although I don't think it's ever explicitly stated that they are in a relationship, but it's very strongly suggested. So of course, if you wanted Finn and Poe to hook up, that didn't happen. And it seems it was never going to happen. There are also some possible hints of Finn being force sensitive. It turns out in Rise of Skywalker he was force sensitive. It's not explicitly stated, but he was. And there are some similar moments here where Finn does like wish Rey good luck, but Rey's on a different ship and Rey manages to pick up on that and say, and yeah, they have a connection across different ships. Maybe that's more to do with Rey picking up on Finn rather than Finn sending a message to Rey, I don't know. But yeah, it could suggest that Finn was always going to be force sensitive. One of the main things that happens to Finn in this one is that he manages to convince other stormtroopers to turn against the First Order. And he does this by basically beating one of them down, getting them to the point where he could kill them, and instead he lets them live and says, basically convinces them to turn to the good side and says start by choosing a name. It's very sudden. It feels like it needs a bit more fleshing out to establish, hey, we want to join Finn, we want to be on the good side, especially when this is just one stormtrooper. And this results in later on, this one stormtrooper manages to get an entire battalion of stormtroopers to support him. So yeah, it's very quickly done. It basically just needed a bit more selling, a bit more further development. It would have been cool to see a bit more of the convincing stuff going on, but I get it, they had to quickly go through it. But it's also suggested that this wasn't possible with the entire First Order, it wasn't possible with every single stormtrooper, but this just very specific group of stormtroopers who went through a very specific form of programming and training that Finn went through. So it's more to do with how they were raised, how they were programmed, and how they were trained, that they are then able to be convinced by Finn. So yeah. But in the final act of the film, Finn leads the Battle of Coruscant on the ground side of things. He takes over an AT-AT kind of thing. There's some cool moments in there. I imagine a lot of this would have been limited by budget and scope. It does feel like they've really just focused on the key events of the battle. Maybe that's just how they did it in the script. Maybe they would have fleshed it out a bit more once it came to actually filming it and so on, coming up with more cool ideas to fit in here and there. And I've already touched on what he and Rose do at the end of the film when they get the Force-sensitive kids. Ultimately, Finn's arc, I feel like there are some really good ideas in there. The whole Stormtrooper conversion thing I think is really interesting, but it did need more further fleshing out, more development, and just a bit more hammering home. But Rose, talking about her role in this film is much more action orientated. She's very much involved in pretty much every action scene on Coruscant and with Finn. And at one point she gets captured and tortured. She then escapes being tortured. Again, this is another dark example of what was happening in this film, of all the dark moments. But yeah, she's portrayed as being a bit more of a badass this time around. But again, for a lot of this film, she's just kind of there being a badass. Yes, she's in the center, she is the main attention of a lot of these action moments. But there's no real reason for that, except that, hey, it's Rose, which is cool. Hux. So Hux is now the Chancellor, or at least he's calling himself the Chancellor. He's ruling the First Order from Coruscant in this new base, which is also happens to be a ship, which is revealed later on. He's also now got greying hair. They make a note of this multiple times, which makes you wonder, what's the time gap between Last Jedi and this? Because for him to go grey in such amount of time, there must be multiple years here. Early in the film, he publicly executes a traitor of the First Order in front of a bunch of people. It's very like Game of Thrones-esque, where he puts some person down. There's like this laser guillotine, very dark, very grim, and it really does a good job of setting up what the tone and mood of this film would be. Ultimately, things are very bleak, basically, right from the get-go, and this is one of the examples of how that's established. We also know that in his office on Coruscant, he has a ancient artifact which happens to be a lightsaber. We find out later on that it's a purple lightsaber. Is it Mace Windu's? Could be. Pretty cool if it is. Although it's a little unexplained, and like, why Mace Windu's lightsaber? Why the connection to Hux? Is it just an homage? Is it just a reference to him? In which case, why throw it away like that? How did he get this lightsaber? Where did it come from? Yeah, it's cool that he's got it, it's cool that it's there, but just a little bit of explanation would have been nice. And Hux is still a source of comedy in this film. There are numerous points where he's trying to use the Force because, well, he's seen Kylo want it, and he realizes that the only way he can get more power is to use the Force. Well, he doesn't have the Force. So a lot of things is just him like doing all that weird stuff, and I imagine that Donald Gleason would have done a really good job of doing that and selling it and making it funny. There's a moment where he is torturing Rose, and he does try to do the whole Kylo Ren thing where he's trying to get to the information from her head and using the Force. And obviously he fails, Rose picks up on it, and yeah, very funny stuff. And eventually, he commits suicide. When things are really bleak, when things are looking bad for the First Order, perhaps a little too early, I would say. I think he should have stuck around a bit more to actually, it didn't look like they were literally on the verge of defeat right there and then. But yeah, he goes to his office, gets the lightsaber, and like a Japanese warrior, he commits suicide with the purple lightsaber. Again, pretty dark. Poe Dameron. So Poe spends a lot of this film dealing with his relationship with Rey, but then he also spends a lot of this film with Chewie and piloting the Millennium Falcon. So his story, it starts off right at the beginning of the movie on Kuat. Kuat, an expanded universe location, finally would be seen in this film. It's basically where the shipyards are, where they fuel all the Star Destroyers and so on, and it's great that they finally put it into a Star Wars movie. Here he leads an infiltration featuring Poe and Finn and Rey and BB-8's up in the space element of it. They're on the surface, BB-8's in space undercover with painted. He's like painted to look like a First Order droid. And Poe leads this infiltration. Things don't go well though. And then all out carnage ensues. They're basically trying to destroy the thing that connects the planet to the stuff in space. But it's really cool. It's like a big spy thriller moment in Star Wars, and I think it would have worked really well, ending out in some cool action moments where Rey does reveal her dual-bladed lightsaber. So we know that he then goes with Rey to Bonadan, where they explore their relationship a little bit more, fight the Knights of Ren. He then later goes to the Battle of Coruscant, where he basically takes part in the space fight at first in the Millennium Falcon. But then he eventually goes down onto the surface in the Millennium Falcon to help fight them. There's a cool moment where he actually flies the Millennium Falcon straight through the legs of an AT-AT kind of thing. and of course crashes the Millennium Falcon doing it. But it's really cool. It would have been great to see that happen. Yeah, that's kind of all that happens with Poe, to be honest. In fact, so much so that Poe is he's just there for most of the film. He doesn't really have an arc. It's just him coming to terms with a relationship with Rey, doing some cool fight scenes, and yeah, being a source of comedy as well in the early moments of the movie. At the end of the movie, when Rey does go missing and when he's the one that goes off in search of them desperately, really showcasing how much he loves her. Again, this feels really forced. This particular example of how determined he is as well feels really forced. And yeah, eventually, of course, she returns and he finds her. But yeah, Poe doesn't have a huge deal to do, he's just kind of there. Chewie, or Chewbacca, whatever you want to call him. Similar to Poe, he's just kind of there, and that's kind of all Chewie's done in this entire sequel trilogy. You could argue that's all he done in the original trilogy as well, but hey, don't argue that. But yeah, Chewie's main contributions in this version of the film, he does fight the Knights of Ren with Rey and Poe, but in the Battle of Coruscant, he really gets to show off his flying skills and his fighting ability. At one point, he gets put into an X-Wing because it's the only ship available, and obviously Chewbacca, being a huge individual, he barely fits into the X-Wing. So that's all comedic stuff, but he really gets to show off his stuff, and it's highlighted that, wow, this guy can fly, this guy's got skills, even if he doesn't fit into the ship very well. There's then a moment that teases his death towards the end of the film, where he is shot multiple times trying to rescue R2-D2 and C-3PO, and it looks like it's really grim, really bleak, but hey, he lives. And then something that's continued from The Rise of Skywalker, he gets the medal at long last, and the end of the film does end with a ceremony akin to A New Hope, which the heroes do get celebrated and do get their medals and so on. Chewie finally gets his moment, and that's kind of all that happens with Chewbacca. R2-D2 and C-3PO, back at it as a couple. This would have been R2-D2's biggest role in the sequel trilogy. He's very key, he's got some important stuff going on here. C-3PO, of course, providing his annoying comedic moments, as he always done. I don't think a lot of them work really that well in this version of the script. I think a lot of them needed to be reworked a bit, and they come across as more awkward and almost nasty in certain regards. And C-3PO has always been lovable but annoying. Here it kind of veers a little too far in the wrong direction, I feel like. And a lot of them are a bit too try-hard as well. So these two, they go to Coruscant with Finn and Rose to help with the Jedi communication stuff. Only they're doing it from a different angle. Finn and Rose are going from one end, they're going from another. They're actually on the ground on the streets of Coruscant. And C-3PO gets to comment on what Coruscant's like, what it looks like, all the gangs and so on, and basically say how scared he is. Towards the end of the movie, in the Battle of Coruscant, R2-D2 gets shot and basically destroyed. He's dead, essentially. Now, this is meant to be a really emotional scene, and it is really emotional, and C-3PO gets to really, for the first time, highlight just how significant R2-D2 is to him, how important he is. And he basically mourns R2-D2's death. And although it is teased and hinted at that R2-D2 is going to be fine, he's going to be repaired. So they do kind of quickly cancel that away. But yeah, it's great to see that they really highlight how important these two characters are, what their relationship is. There's also a scene in here that C-3PO has to basically kill another droid in order to accomplish a task. And it's supposed to be really comedic and funny, and that he's like, oh, I don't want to do it, and all that and stuff, and that he's worried about doing it. But it actually comes across more like harrowing and desperate than funny, and I think that it was meant to be funny. So I don't know, maybe once they actually filmed it and it was on screen, maybe it would have came across much more how they intended it, or how I think they intended it, than what it actually does come across, in my opinion. But speaking about C-3PO mourning R2-D2, there's a very similar scene to the end of Empire Strikes Back, and what was also featured in The Rise of Skywalker, in which C-3PO is talking to someone. I can't remember who he's talking to, but he's talking to someone about R2-D2 and how he doesn't want to go on without R2-D2. R2-D2 means a great deal to him, and then before he can actually say the words like, I love him or whatever, someone says, I know. So there, again, a really good homage and callback and a great moment there. But at the end of the movie, R2-D2's memory cores are used to show a holographic recount of basically all of R2-D2's memories. Coincidentally, only the memories from the original trilogy. So yeah, basically it pans through all of them, showing you all these great moments between the original trilogy leading up to the events of this film, with really showing Leia what's going on. It's meant to be really emotional and really like just poignant moment, and it didn't really work for me. Again, it felt a bit forced. Luke Skywalker. So throughout this film, Luke visits both Rey and Kylo as a Force ghost, guiding them, advising them, and teaching about things. And of course, when he's visiting Kylo, he's on Mortis and basically saying, hey, you don't want to go here, you don't want to do all this. Which also means that he then go to Rey and say, hey, Kylo's over here, and stuff like that. So it's really interesting how they do that, how he's visiting both of them. But his role in this film was much bigger than what it would have been in The Rise of Skywalker. The Rise of Skywalker, he's essentially only in one scene. Here, he has got multiple scenes. There's one scene in which he does visit Leia, and they have a good heart-to-heart little thing. It's very brief, very small, not that significant. It's right before the Battle of Coruscant and the fight between Rey and Kylo. And yeah, but it's great that they get their moment together. But the biggest moment for Luke Skywalker is when he does confront Kylo on Mortis. As a Force ghost, Kylo, out of anger, tries to basically attack Luke. Well, Luke's the Force ghost, so at this point, we don't really know how all this works exactly. We know that Force ghosts can interact with the living environment, because we've seen Obi-Wan Kenobi sit down on objects, we saw Yoda basically whack Luke over the head with his stick. Well, here, Kylo goes to attack Luke, and Luke grabs the lightsaber with his hand. And Kylo's, of course, shocked and surprised. And I don't want to say I take credit for this, but this is an idea that I had for what I thought would be a really cool moment years ago, and here it is in this script. So, yeah, who's been reading my mind? But anyway, he grabs this lightsaber, a really cool moment, and then Luke recounts the explanation of the Force that was told to him by Obi-Wan. Really dramatic, really emotional, really powerful stuff. And probably the best scene in the whole film, if I'm honest. But yeah, that's kind of all Luke does. He's very much a mentor, advisory role in this film, on the outside, looking in, trying to guide the two main characters. Final person, probably the most significant, most interesting one, Leia. So this sequel trilogy, it was always said that the first film would be a Han Solo movie, the second one would be Luke, and this one would be Leia. I don't really get that though, because yes, Leia has a much bigger role in this one than what she did in The Rise of Skywalker, because sadly Carrie Fisher passed away. But I would also argue that while her role's bigger in this movie, it's also less significant. In fact, she only has one real purpose, and that's to reach out to her son, Kylo, and she does that pretty much exactly the same way in which she does it in The Rise of Skywalker, only she doesn't die. So yeah, that's all she really does in this movie. She spends a lot of this film being a general military leader, so she is there in the Battle of Coruscant, giving out instructions, telling everyone what to do. At one point, she also goes to visit Lando Calrissian to ask him to recruit a bunch of smugglers to help to help him recruit a bunch of smugglers to help the Resistance. Very brief, very sudden scene. So much so that she basically says hello, he says, oh, we can't talk right now. They explain what she wants, and he basically says, right, you've got to go. That's pretty much all Lando does in this entire film. Lando's role in this movie is super disappointing, because he doesn't come across as Lando, he doesn't do anything that's particularly Lando-ish, and yeah, it feels like it's just a glorified cameo if that. He does show up at the end of the movie with the smugglers, much like he does at the end of Rise of Skywalker, so that's another thing they pulled from it, but yeah, it would have been really disappointing if that's all Lando had done in the final movie in the trilogy. Leia also gets to spend a lot of time with Connix, who was played by Billie Lourd, her daughter. But yeah, she doesn't really do much in this whole film, which would have been disappointing. Again, her role in The Rise of Skywalker is smaller, but it's also more important and more significant, I would say. And that's Duel of the Fates. I do encourage you to go and read it. It is enjoyable, it is fun, although, like I said, I have problems with it. Would it have been better than The Rise of Skywalker? I don't think so. I think it would have been way more controversial, way more darker, and I understand why Lucasfilm and Disney would have been reluctant to make it. So yeah, go read the script for yourself. It is easily accessible. I do encourage you to do that. I think you'll enjoy it, even if you don't overall like it or prefer it to The Rise of Skywalker. If you've liked this video, subscribe to my channel to get more content like this. And of course go over to Twitter and Instagram and follow me at _Grant Burton, where you can get all my up-to-date thoughts and opinions on pretty much everything as I get them, or as soon as I can be bothered to post them. Until next time though, thanks for watching.